So, crazy patchwork, let's incorporate it into a Quilted to Go flower block. Welcome back to Pattern Poole TV. If you're new here, I'm Monica Poole, and every week I post a video about how I make my Quilted to Go quilts. I give lots of hints and tips to help you improve your sewing skills. Crazy patchwork has been around for centuries. It's where you join small pieces of fabric together to make one complete textile piece. I love crazy patchwork as it's a great way to use up some scraps, and it's lots of fun. So much fun that I use it a lot in my quilt designs. I just love the eclectic look it gives and how versatile it is. I've done a heart, a vase, a flower centre, and even a moon in our Twilight Dreaming quilt. These have all been edged with bias. So today I'm going to show you how you can incorporate crazy patchwork into a stitch and flip Quilted to Go block. So stick around and let's have some fun. Every crazy patchwork block is unique. No two blocks will be the same. There's no right and wrong with crazy patchwork. It's just about having fun and joining some scraps together to make a beautiful crazy patchwork block. Here's what you'll need to make one block. First of all, start with a non-directional background print. Cut two 3-inch squares and cut them once on the diagonal to give you 4 triangles. All of our outer strips are cut 2.5 inches wide. You'll need one that's cut 10.5 inches long. You'll need 2 at 7 inches. 2 at 4.5 inches and 2 at 1.5 inches. For our leaves and stem, you'll need a green fabric, so cut 2 1.5 inch squares and one strip that's 1 inch wide by 2.5 inches high. You'll also need a piece of plain quilting cotton. That's going to be our base for the crazy patchwork. This piece of fabric won't be seen, and you'll need a 7.5 inch square for the base. And then you'll need your backing square, your 10-inch backing square, and a 9-inch square of batting. I have centered that in the middle, so I've got my 1/2 inch gap all the way around the edge, and I've held those together with a light application of basting spray, but you can also use a couple of dabs of glue to hold them together, just like I've shown before in some of my other videos. For the crazy patchwork, you can use scraps. If you don't have scraps, cut some strips. I like to start with my strips being 1.5 inches wide. Maybe choose about 8 different fabrics. You can use as many as you like. They can be any length. Start with shorter lengths and cut more if you need more as your flower grows. Here are the cutting instructions. Take a screenshot or head to our blog. Now, if you're joining in with our free Quilted to Go along, you'll need to make 2 blocks, but if not, this is just a fun technique to add to your patchwork and quilting repertoire. So first you're going to need to make a template from some plain printer paper. Cut a 6.5 inch square. Fold your square in half twice. These are our folded edges here, and this is our non-folded edge here and also here. From the non-folded edge, from the corner, make a mark that is 1 7/8 of an inch away from the corner. That's that little mark just before the 2 inch. And then do the same thing on the other side, so 1 7/8. Connect those marks. You can either mark this with a pencil, or you can just cut straight away with your rotary cutter. Here's our octagon template. Don't worry too much if it's not absolutely perfect, because crazy patchwork is all about non-perfection. Now to prepare the centerpiece for the crazy patchwork. Take your 7.5 inch background square and fold it in half to find the center. So we're going to just finger crease on the horizontal center line there, and then fold it over so that we can get our crease on the vertical line. Open that out, and then take your octagon template and just line it up so we've got the creases of the paper, and just get the creases of the paper aligned with the fabric creases, and mark all the way around the edge of your template. Flip the fabric over and mark the octagon onto the fabric in the same way. Now, it doesn't really matter if this is the right or the wrong side, because this piece of fabric is not going to be seen once we have stitched all of the crazy patchwork over this piece of fabric. And there we are. I'm using yellow for the center. I've just started off with a rough 2-inch square, And for crazy patchwork, it's always really good to start with a 5-sided shape. So it's just going to be a really odd shape. So I'm just kind of cutting away with my scissors here, just so that I get some kind of a 5-sided shape. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, I'm quite happy with that. Now I'm just going to take this piece. Now this can be any size, so don't worry about it. Everybody's crazy patchwork is going to be different. There's no right and no wrong with crazy patchwork. So there's my center piece there. Now I'm going to head to the sewing machine and we're going to start stitching all of our pieces around the edge of this center shape. At the machine I have a neutral coloured thread, a size 70 needle. You need a 1/4 inch seam, so you can use your 1/4 inch foot or just move your needle position over so that you have a 1/4 inch seam with your standard foot. And I also have a small stitch length of 2. So here are all of my scraps. Some of them are odd shaped pieces and I also have my 1.5" strips there also. I think I've got about 8 or 9 different fabrics. I'm going to start with my smaller pieces, starting to stitch around that center shape first of all. Take your first piece and put it right sides together with the edge of our center shape. You can make it level to start with. And we're just going to sew. There's no need to reverse at the beginning and at the end. In fact, it's better not to. And you want to finish sewing level with the underneath shape. Cut the thread and then pull the work out from your machine and flip your first piece over to the right side. Now we're going to continue working clockwise around our center shape, and now I'm just going to take my next piece and I'm going to put it right sides together with the next edge, but I'm going to extend it up so that it's going to start level with the top edge of the shape or the piece of fabric that I just sewed on. I'm going to sew level from the top of this strip down to where the bottom of our center shape finishes. Trim away the excess of our first piece of fabric and flip this piece over to the right side. Take your next piece of fabric and position it right sides together with the center shape, extending up past or just level with the piece that we just sewed on. So from the top to the bottom again, stopping level with the underneath shape. Trim away the excess fabric and flip your piece over to the right side. Take your next piece, place it right sides together with the next edge of your center shape, extending your piece up past that shape there and onto the fabric that was just sewn on. So from the top to the bottom, stopping level with the underneath shape. Trim away the excess fabric and flip your piece over to the right side. Take your next piece and position it level with the edge of the center shape, but this time we're going to extend this piece because this is our last edge, so we want to extend it up past our piece we just sewn on and down to our first piece that we sewed on. Trim away the excess fabric and flip your piece over to the right side. Okay, so we've sewn once around the center and now we're going to sew around again. Locate your first piece that you sewed on, and this is now going to become the first edge for our second round. When you go to sew these pieces on, we want to get some really interesting shapes. So I'm going to just position this piece on like that. I'm starting to use some strips now because I need some bigger pieces. And rather than just sewing that level with the edge of this shape here, I'm going to actually just put it on a little bit of a tilt like that. So starting up the top here, and I'm going to sew down to the bottom, finishing level with the underneath shape. And I'm just going to continue sewing my pieces around and just making sure that each time I sew a strip on, it's on a little bit of an angle. As your piece grows, you may need to unpick a few stitches from your underneath fabrics just before you trim away the excess. And remember, there's no perfection with crazy patchwork. So all you have to do now is just keep stitching and flipping those pieces around the edge to make sure that you fill in all of the octagon shape. So that's our crazy patchwork complete. Now it's time to give it a press. Flip your crazy patchwork over to the wrong side and double check that it's the same size as your template. And now we're going to trim it to the octagon shape. And here's a little tip. I'm going to hold my template in place with a couple of dabs of glue, and I'm going to trim around the edge with my rotary cutter. And here's our crazy patchwork octagon. Now it's time to mark up your batting and backing square. I'm using a 4B lead pencil and it's nice and sharp. I'm going to mark a border all the way around the edge of my block, just lightly. The line is going to be 1 3/4 of an inch away from the edge of the fabric. Be careful not to mark your lines too dark because dark lines will show through light fabric. Now take your octagon and position it into the center of these marked lines. You'll see that's going to give you some triangles on the outer edge there. We're now going to fill these triangles in using the triangle fabric pieces that we cut previously. So back at my machine, I have a neutral coloured thread on, something that's going to blend with all of my fabrics but also look good on the back of the quilt. I have a size 80 quilting needle and I have just my standard foot on with the needle moved over to the right hand side so that the distance from my needle to the edge of the foot is going to give me a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I have a stitch length of 3 and I also have an automatic tie off set for the beginning and end. If you don't have that, you just need to do a little reverse stitch at the beginning and end of each row of sewing. Now the triangles don't have to be sewn in perfectly, but just so long as they fill in that triangle space. Hold your flower in place with one pin in the center and then take your first triangle and place it right sides together with the edge of your flower. Position your triangle so that you have an even amount extending over each edge and then make dots that are 1/4 of an inch away from the underneath fabric. And we're going to sew from dot to dot. This is so that we don't have stitches crossing over and looking messy on the back of our quilt. And you can set your machine with a tie-off for the beginning and at the end. And if you don't have this function, just do a little reverse stitch at the beginning and at the end of each row. So let's sew on the outer side borders. Place a 7.5 inch background piece right sides together with the side edge of our flower and align it with the previously marked lines here and here. It's a little bit longer, so center it so that you have the same amount extending past both ends. And now we're going to mark our 1/4 inch dots. Mark your 1/4 inch dots 1/4 inch away from the line that goes across and the line that goes down. So just there. Sew from dot to dot and then trim away this excess fabric here, flip the piece over to the right side and then sew on your other side piece in the same way. So now that you've sewn on the outer side borders, it's now time to sew on the top border, and then we're going to piece together our bottom section with our stem and leaves. But first, let's remark the top and bottom line because we can no longer see it anymore because it's covered by the fabric. So just remarking that line that is 1 3/4 inches away from the edge of the fabric. We're going to do that on this side, and we'll do it on the other side of the block. Take your top background piece, that's our longest strip, and place it right sides together. Make it level with the marked line. This is going to keep this strip nice and straight. It's a little bit longer, so you can center it, and now you can just stitch it on, sewing all the way from edge to edge. No need to mark the dots this time. So take these smaller pieces here and take your squares, your green squares, and then pop them onto the top edge of the background pieces. We're now going to mark lines going from corner to corner on the wrong side of our squares. And so let's just pretend that our stem is going to go in the middle. So therefore our lines are being marked from the top down to the outer bottom edge. You need to make sure that your diagonal lines go from the outer bottom edge up to the top middle corner, and the same thing again here in the opposite direction. So our top to the outside edge there. So on the marked diagonal lines, stitching slightly to the outside edge of the line, just like we have done in previous blocks. Press the corner of the square over so that it meets the corner of the background piece. Trim 1/4 inch away from the stitching line. And repress. Lay our bottom row out so that we have the stem in the middle, we've got our triangle leaves on either side and our outer pieces, and join all of these pieces together with 1/4 inch seam allowance. If you're wondering what this piece is, I call this piece my leader, and what it does is it stops my fabric from being chewed up into the hole when I start to sew. Press your seams in towards the darkest colour. Before we sew on our bottom row, we need to mark the halfway point at the bottom edge of the flower. So you can do that by using a ruler and lining up the 5-inch line along the bottom, because our block is 10 inches, so 5 inches is half. And there we are, I'm just going to make that tiny little mark there. Now I'm going to take this piece and place it right sides together with the bottom edge. I'm going to line up the centre of the stem with my centre mark, and I'm going to line the edges here up with the 1 3/4 inch line that I previously marked. And now I'm going to sew this piece on just by sewing from edge to edge of the block. Press your block and trim your block. So I've trimmed my block up to the same size as my backing square, and then when I go to join all my blocks together, I'm going to double check that they're all the same size, and if not, I'm only going to trim them slightly before I join them together. So we're halfway. We've got 18 blocks so far. We've got another 18 to do. That's going to give us 36 blocks. So we're going to have 6 blocks across, 6 blocks down, and that's going to give us a beautiful lap-size quilt. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, click like and share it with a friend. Anyway, I'll see you next time. Bye.